I don't want to pressure people. I don't want to bug people. I don't want to feel like I'm being annoying. This should be a fun experience for people. And it's an opportunity for me to have that great guest on my show. And it's an opportunity, hopefully, for them to have promotion for what they're doing. So it should be a win-win.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
Welcome back to another episode of the Podcast on Podcasting. It's Adam A. Adams, and pardon the interruption, podcaster, but Marie Tejada, 54, has sent an honest written review. And as a result, she's entered to win free services from Grow Your Show. And you could be entered to win free services from Grow Your Show as well. So Marie Tejada, I hope I'm saying that right, Tejada. I'm thinking that J is a H sound. So at any rate, she just sent us a written review just a couple of days ago. And the title of it says, "A Great Inspiration," and then it has like a heart sign. And then she just basically says, "This show is great for learning tips and tricks that would otherwise take years to learn. If you want to start your own podcast, I highly recommend listening to this." So Marie, just so you know, you've got one entry automatically just because you left a review to winning free services from my company, growyourshow.com. And on top of that, you have the ability now that you're hearing this on the podcast to turn that 1 into 6 and get those 5 additional entries. You might have heard this before. All you got to do to get those additional entries is, it's very simple. Take a screenshot of this review, and then you're going to email me and my team at team@growyourshow.com. Pretty easy. team@growyourshow.com. And just let me know that you heard this. And just by simply doing that with a screenshot of this, we actually add those additional 5. So actually our first winner a couple of months ago, Matt Cummings, he was able to win because he heard himself on this and he got those extra ones. So there was like 4 people that he was going against. And because he was the only one who replied, he got those additional ones and he had a higher probability and he ended up winning. And same with Stacy Katrina. Now, 2 people, the Lyons brothers from Cityside Cap and Stacy, both replied and got extra whatever their entries. But Stacy ended up taking the win. It was pretty cool. So we're excited to work with Matt. We're excited to work with Stacy. And maybe we'll be working with you, Marie, to have a higher chance, a higher probability. All you got to do is take screenshots and team@growyourshow.com. If you haven't yet done that, if you are listening and you're like, I want to be entered, I want free shit. Simple. Just leave an honest review. I'm not asking for a 5-star review. I'm not asking for a fake review. I'm asking you to literally say what you truly believe about this podcast, and you're going to be entered to win. So congratulations, Marie. And a couple days ago, I probably read off Deborah's. A couple days before that, I probably read off The Fallible Man's. And a couple days before that, I read off Michael's. So far, these are going to be the 4 people that are going to be included in this upcoming one. And so you guys just make sure that you take a screenshot of your review. Let me know of the episode that I mentioned it on. All right. I don't want to take any more time than we need to on this. We've got a great episode ahead. Let's transition because I don't want to take any more time than we need to on the written reviews and the free stuff that we're giving away. I want to jump right into the content today. So let's do it. Today, I'm with Courtenay Turner. Courtenay, how you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. Glad to be here.
You better be. Courtenay's a fairly new podcaster, but she's learned quite a bit along the way. That means that she launched the show about 6 months ago, and she had been thinking about starting a podcast for a little bit before that. So I have a few questions that I wanted to ask you, Courtenay, to get into how we as future podcasters or current podcasters could learn from doing what you're doing. I want to start with, how long did you think about starting a podcast before you actually launched a show?
So if I try and think back, I think it was probably a few months, maybe like 4 months. Yeah, it was a strange time. A lot of people had suggested it to me, and the immediate thought was an overwhelming sense of fear. And then kind of, what do I talk about? What do I do? Just this analysis paralysis. And I think I debated the name for a really, really long time. And that was kind of one of those things I let kind of stand in the way until I was like, well, I'm just going to talk about what I want to talk about. So we'll just make it the Courtenay Turner podcast.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Now, did you feel like people were going to judge you for naming it after yourself? Like, was there ever a thing where you were thinking, maybe I shouldn't call it that because people will be like, who are you? Or something like that. I know others that have thought that. I'm just curious if you have.
Interesting. No, that wasn't so much of the thought. It was more like I had all these really clever names that I thought would be really fun and cute. But I realized that I had a very wide range of things that I wanted to discuss with people. And it's really, I've always been fascinated by the human experience and just people in general. So, and I love to learn from other people. So I realized that if I were to come up with like a cute name or try and pigeonhole it, it wasn't going to be authentic. And I felt like naming it after myself would allow for the opportunity as I grow and evolve, and as the show grows and evolves, that it had the room to do so. And I also understand that it's not going to be for everyone. So I wasn't trying to please everyone.
Cool. Makes sense. So it took you, you said like a few months to kind of, you already knew you kind of wanted one. Friends were telling you you should probably have one. Mm-hmm. And what was holding you back for 4 months? I mean, some people, not everybody, some people are like, oh yeah, I should have a podcast. And they like decide and they're recording one day later. And others take a few months or a few years. So what was really holding you back?
I would say a lot of fear and lack of clarity. Lack of clarity is a big one, but I think that that probably stemmed more from fear than anything. Looking back on it, I don't think I realized that at the time, but just not having a clear sense of what specifically it was going to be about, how I was going to find people, how I was going to just the structure of it, a lot of that. And then just the fear of what if and nobody ever listened to it? What if I really suck? What if this is the worst idea ever? So
what about, like, there was a piece that you said a lot there. And one thing I was holding on to, and I had a question on it, but then I just kept listening to the rest. And it's, no, do not say sorry. This is my fault. So you basically say there's a lot of things that were holding you back. Some of it was fear. Some of it was not yet being prepared and not knowing what direction that you should take the podcast. What was like the catalyst that allowed you to say, just go, I'm just going to do it?
So I'm not sure there was like a specific catalyst, but really the genesis of this was tremendous depression and anxiety. We were really, really locked down. I live in Santa Monica, California, and virus measures that were implemented were very, very restrictive, to the extent that like I would go to another county to take a hike with a friend just so I could see people and get out. And I found myself incredibly depressed and just feeling, I'm very much an empath, and I could feel the collective anxiety, and it was really, really getting to me. But I realized that, and I tell this story often, which it sounds kind of silly, but I used to go down every day to the local liquor store because he would honor my medical exemption for the mask, and he would talk to me. And I realized I'm not a big drinker. Sometimes I would just buy water or like protein bars, gum. But I did realize I was actually drinking a lot more than I'm comfortable with, than I even enjoy. There was one moment where I had poured myself, and I think it was like half a glass of wine. It was like less than a bottle a week. So it's not a lot for some people, but it was a lot for me, especially to be at home alone. That just isn't typical for me. But there was one night where I had poured a glass and I didn't like the taste of it, which I only bought stuff that I really enjoyed. So that was very odd. I'm like, what's going on here? And I realized that this was out of like desperate need to connect. I went down there so I could talk to somebody and see a face. And So I pretty much stopped that. I put an end to that. I was like, I'm still going to go down there, but the wine needs to stop. But I was also chewing my mom's ear off. So initially, before starting the podcast, the idea was a lot of people had suggested a blog as well. I was just posting a lot on social media because I was so frustrated, so isolated, had a lot of thoughts, a lot of things I wanted to say and share. I annoyed quite a few people, I'm sure, in the process, hit several nerves. But when I thought, well, okay, now maybe the great opportunity to write. And I sat in front of my computer the first day the lockdown started. And at the end of 10 hours, I had a beautiful blank page staring back at me. So I was not all that successful in the writing process, but I have enough experience with the creative process to know that it's not something that can be forced. And I respected that I was just too anxious and overwhelmed and depressed at that moment to really be successful in my writing journey. And I needed to take a step back. So I ordered a bunch of books. And I love to read. I was like, I have this great opportunity now. I have all this time. I can read all these things that I really never had the time for before. But then I found myself wanting to talk to people about all these great ideas that I was reading about. And I love my mother, but I really just chewed her ear off. And I think I was getting to the point where I was abusing her generosity as being my sounding board. And that was the moment where the combination of those things where I realized I want to do this. And I mostly did it for me. I said, I hope that other people find benefit in these conversations. I hope that it's of value to others. But if not, it may literally be the thing that saves my life. And so I'm just going to do it. And I also realized that you're never going to start off with having it all figured out. So I figured I was better off starting and figuring it out all along the way, because I knew the purpose at the time was really, they say that necessity is the motherhood of invention. So I think that was really the genesis for me. Sorry, that was long-winded.
No, don't be. I was wanting to find out, like, with all of the things that were holding you back, like fear of, is anyone going to listen? Fear of, am I doing the right thing? Am I going to pigeonhole myself? Or should I do this? Or all of those things. And then you ended up doing it mostly because, like, you knew that connection was a big thing for you. Mm-hmm. And during lockdown, it was a challenge for most of us to be able to connect. And so for you, this was like a way to open up and start having those conversations. And I think that that's like a lovely story. I think that that makes a lot of sense. And I think you're not the only one who probably started for those reasons, you know,
probably
to
not
save your life or whatever. But right. I wanted to find out, you decided you're going to do it, and you're going forward. You're not talking your mom's ear off anymore. And you're probably running into like issues, because all of us do. And I know I did. And since it was only a few months back, I wanted to see if I could ask you to maybe share a few of those like learning lessons, those hard moments, those things that you had to learn, those things that surprised you as you were launching a podcast that you kind of had to navigate and overcome.
Absolutely. So it's interesting because the beginning actually was much smoother than a few months into it was. So, and I strangely feel like that has been true for a lot of my life. Like, I tend to pick things up pretty quickly. And in the beginning of things, that learning curve is a little bit easier than for some others. And then I get to that, like, I don't know, it's not really a midway point, but, you know, I get a little further into it. And then all of a sudden, all these issues came up. So I was really surprised in the beginning. Just there was no shortage of being able to book people, reach people. I had people reaching out to me that were super excited, super supportive. The conversations were incredibly fulfilling and enjoyable for me and for, I mean, my audience was, I was just starting, it was very small, but there was a lot of positive feedback. And then I guess at the point where I realized I had also started a multimedia publication called Truth Matters. That's with two other partners. Around this time, it was a little bit after the podcast. I was trying to grow both, and there are two podcasts on Truth Matters as well. So around that point where I started to think of this more as I want to grow this for two reasons, because I put so much into it. I'd like to make it a business, but two, also because I felt that by growing it, I could have impact, which is something I was hoping to. I think that there's value people can derive from the conversations, and that was my hope. But if it's the smaller the audience, the less the opportunity is to have that. So I found myself in a position where some of the biggest challenges were it was much easier to book it really initially. And then it got harder. There have been times where it's been easier and then harder. And that's always nerve wracking. I'm like, well, will I be able to fill up, and will I have just like this dead spot? So that sometimes goes through my head. Then of course, growing the podcast has been a huge challenge for me. I know very little about marketing. I'm not super tech savvy on any end of it. That has been a challenge as well. Like the whole technical side of it. So Adam knows I'm hearing impaired. This is actually going pretty well though. So that's encouraging and exciting, but it gives me an occlusion effect. So I typically don't, and I just don't know much about that whole technical side of it. So that's been a learning curve for me as well. And I have a lot more research and investigation to do in that process. But yeah, so I would say certainly like the growing, I haven't even worried about like me making it like I'm really focused on just like getting the ears, listening, watching people right now. But that and the tech, I would say, have been really challenging. And then there's just always I think most people can relate to this with anything in life. There's always the self-doubt and the fears that do creep in. It's like, well, am I really on the right path? What if this isn't successful? What if the next episode has like 0 people listen and then it's just like hate messages or whatever? So all of those things. And I think other people could probably relate to that as well. And that's just the fear of anytime you put your heart and soul into anything, there's always the fear of what if it doesn't work out?
I've got a lot of thoughts on that. And I did remember the question that I was going to ask before.
Great.
You were talking about one of your concerns back then when you were starting the podcast initially, and what was holding you back, you said, could I find people? And I was just going to clarify what that meant by, what do you mean by find people? And then a moment ago, you said book people. And so that's kind of what jogged my mind about the find people. I'm trying to understand is if this is like your guests for your podcast. Was that kind of what was holding you back, is you didn't know if you could find guests that would want to, like people that want to guest on their show?
So in the very beginning, it was actually super easy. And I am so incredibly honored. I had like people I really look up to and admire and just have tremendous respect for their work. And I was like candy store, so excited about these conversations because it was like all the neurons firing kind of an experience for me. And it ended up being exactly that. So I'm so grateful that I've had that opportunity. But yes, there was a time where that became more challenging. So I think that's when I was saying, like in the beginning, it was kind of easy. But nothing's ever always easy, right?
Yeah.
So in a way,
what do you think made it challenging? Like, what do you think you had it in the beginning? Like what slowed it down? Was it your motivation? Did you just run out of people? Did people start saying no?
I faced more rejection, or not flat out rejection, but like people would say yes and then not follow up. And then that makes me feel like, well, I don't want to push them. I don't want to pressure them. So that's where then I just feel rejected in general. That's like, and I understand that that's part of the process, but if you're asking what goes through my head, there is that element.
So it sounded like it was a fear in the beginning of getting guests, but you learned quickly that it wasn't that big of a deal because most of the people were saying yes. And then it became more of a challenge because more internally, I think, or what I think I'm hearing is like, you asked, but they might not have said yes or followed back up with you. And you took that as maybe I'm asking too much, or maybe I shouldn't be asking, or I'm afraid to follow up because then it could turn into me thinking that it's a no, and to me like possibly knowing that it's a no or something like that. Is that?
Yeah. And then there's just also, and this is a big one for me personally, just like I don't want to pressure people. I don't want to bug people. I don't want to feel like I'm being annoying. Like this should be a fun experience for people. And it's an opportunity for both of us. It's an opportunity for me to have that great guest on my show. And it's an opportunity, hopefully, for them to have promotion for what they're doing. So I think it should be a win-win, but I don't want to feel like I'm hounding somebody to have that.
Yeah, I don't know, but I think this could help you in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
So here comes the time that you're initially contacting someone.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be thinking about them like, how do I add value to this person?
Mm-hmm.
Do they want their story out? Do they want to leave a legacy? We need to maybe ask our potential guests some questions like doctors do before they diagnose us.
Mm-hmm.
Does it hurt here? Does it hurt if you twist this way?
Mm-hmm.
How does that feel? Where does it hurt?
Sure.
What did you do to get into this situation or whatever it is? But like, as we're doing this with guests, we're learning about them. And I think then that we're armed with that information, then we can just say, well, I'd love to help you get your story out. I'd love to help you leave a legacy and make sure that other people don't make the mistakes that you made or whatever it is.
Right.
And then we could, when we're following up, we could say, John, or whoever you're having, Carla or Amy or Tom or whatever name, I know that you were interested in getting your story out. I'm still here to extract that and give it to my listeners and grow your influence or grow your brand. When do you want to do that? I think that would be a good way for you, because then on the follow-up, you would maybe not feel like you are being overbearing, but you're being helpful. Like, I'm still here to help you get your story out the way that you told me. When do you want to do that?
Right.
Anyway, does that help
I
at all?
like that. Yeah,
Okay.
no, absolutely.
Okay.
I like that a lot. Yeah,
Awesome.
absolutely.
So there was a few things that were hard, and one of them, it sounded like finding guests, growing the audience is still something, the tech savvy thing, which I'm going to come back to it here in a moment.
Okay.
But along those lines, you mentioned that you also connected with a couple other people and started something called Truth Matters. And in the process, in just over the last few months, you launched your podcast. And it sounds like you launched 2 new podcasts with Truth Matters.
I did.
So you actually launched 3 podcasts.
Yes.
Wow. So a couple of things on that. Number one, just a quick answer. Do you recommend our listener start 3 podcasts at the same time?
No, I don't. Definitely don't.
Why not?
Well, it's a lot. And on top of it, writing articles and managing both businesses. So it's a lot to manage and oversee. And especially as somebody new to this world, this is not something I have like decades worth of experience in. So it might be very different for somebody who has a lot of experience, but the skill set going into it, for me, I don't regret doing it. I just want to say that at all. Super excited about all the future holds. And not that I know, but the possibilities, the potential is really exciting to me. And I'm really passionate about what I'm doing. But I think that it's definitely a lot. Usually people have more success when they focus on one thing. But mine, they intertwine. There's connectivity and relatedness in all of them. So they're not like completely separate entities, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And you said one thing is that you don't regret doing it. You're grateful, you're happy, you're glad. But I'll still like to ask again to go into a little bit more depth on that, because I'm just curious, even though you don't regret it, if you went back 11 months ago, 12 months ago to the Courtenay that was just being told by some of her friends, you should have a podcast, and she's just thinking that she wants to have a podcast. If you went all the way back and like poured into previous Courtenay with all the experience, you might not say you shouldn't do all 3, but perhaps now that you've experienced what you have, you might have some advice of which one to start, when to start it,
Mhm.
And I'm curious if there's anything about, you said something like focus is important. And that's how you do better. I always think about it like chasing two rabbits. It's real hard to catch either one.
That's a great analogy.
It's real hard to catch either one. But if you focus on one, you might get one.
Yeah.
So with that said, take yourself, you're now yourself, and go back 11, 12 months to the original Courtenay that's thinking about a podcast and will eventually start it in about 4 or 5 months from now.
Yeah.
What would you tell yourself?
So what I would tell myself, and I actually don't think that I would, like I said, I don't regret it. I would not change doing these three. The way they're structured is different. Like my show is twice a week. Those are once a month. And it's very different doing a podcast. They're all kind of very different styles. And it's very different doing a podcast where it's you interviewing somebody versus more collective group discussion. So those are they're different, and energetically in terms of time and management and all that is also different. But I think the biggest thing that I would really advise myself going back is to have more of a plan, like probably have like a structured, even if it wasn't a formal business plan, although I might have done that, but I would have learned more of the technology. I would have really outlined my goals and what it was going to look like and how it was going to, I mean, things always change and evolve, but to at least have more of a plan, I think is really, I kind of jumped in, like both feet in. And there's
Did anything happen negatively? Did you just jumping in any way negatively affect like the outcome of what you're doing?
I actually don't know that it did. I think it's more psychologically. And I think this is a personality thing. Some people like to be super prepared, feel like they have their arsenal and they're ready to go. And I think I might have had a little more confidence going in, and then you have something to follow. It's a blueprint and you can keep following that. But I don't know that it negatively impacted, because the flip side of that, it's all about balance, right? So I think the flip side of that is you can get so stuck and rigid in like over preparing. You're never going to know enough. You're never going to learn enough. You're never going to be prepared enough, truthfully. So it's a fine line, knowing which, how much do you need to know before you start. And sometimes people get caught up, and I know myself in the past, I've gotten caught up in like, I have to know everything and I have to have it all mapped out. Otherwise I can't start. And then you never start. So in a way, I think, I'm not sure that if I had done it the reverse way, if I would have started all, I think the fear would have taken over, because I would have spent so much time preparing, planning, learning. So in a way, for me, it probably was best that I dove in. But now I have a lot of catching up to do. So
Awesome. So I love that. I think that is so helpful to somebody about to start a podcast, to see inside of your head, like the pros, the cons, what ended up happening bad from just diving in. And it was like nothing. The answer was, I couldn't even pinpoint one thing that happened wrong to me or to the podcast because I dove in. In fact, it's almost better that I at least got it started and wasn't still thinking about it 11 months later. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So structure.
There are little things that I obviously need to tweak now, but it's not like it all ended up perfectly. I'm not saying that, but yeah.
Well, and thank you for that. I think that's important to point out as well, that it's not all perfect. It's always learning. And even somebody who's been doing it for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, they're still going to make tweaks and changes along the way. They're still going to learn more about technology and more about getting a bigger audience and finding better guests and how to ask the guests. And we're all going to be growing each and every month, each and every day, hopefully. But I want to go back to something I said I would come back. That is, you mentioned that you were not really tech savvy. You still were able to like get the podcast up and running. So I'm curious, like many of us are not tech savvy. I'm one. And the way I overcame it was partnering with somebody else who already has done a podcast and had the equipment, because I didn't know what to buy, what I should buy, where to get it, and all that kind of stuff. So my way was partnering, but I don't think that was your answer. So I'm curious, you were concerned about the tech stuff. how to get to the next level, but you didn't let it hold you back. So how did you overcome the technology?
So I asked other people who had podcasts. I figured they might know a little bit about what equipment I needed. And most of them said they used their laptop. I mean, some people had really big, they do in person. And that I've realized in person, as much as I love it, it's a real production. And I come from the entertainment world. I was an actress and a producer. So I know a real production, it's a production. It's not that a podcast is an undertaking in of itself. But when you start adding production value to it, that's a whole nother ballgame. But yeah, so I talked to people who did more of these like virtual type podcasts and asked them about the type of equipment. And I kind of took survey. I did research online. And I really just felt that if I got myself too bogged down with getting equalizers and just all the stuff that I don't even know the names of, truth be told, and I will do it. I'm about to move in 3 weeks and I have a vision for a studio that I'm building and I'll start diving into that. But I felt that for me, the most important thing was going to be the content. And I have interview experience. So I knew it was something that I could do. And I figured out which might look comfortable for me, and I had my laptop. And ultimately, I was just hoping that the conversations themselves would hold the value and that the technology would catch up as I learned more.
Good. I love it. What about, like, you said more of a structured plan, more technology, outlined your goals more.
Yeah.
So I know we can't go back into history, but there's probably somebody listening there's probably somebody who's listening. And I think they needed to hear that it's okay to just get it started, to just go and learn along the way. But I'm
so sorry. Done. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say really quickly, it's something that I've learned from, I've started a lot of businesses and I've also not started a lot of ideas that I've had. I'm an idea person. Part of why I love podcasting. I like talking about ideas. And one of the things that I realized is that I have sat on so many ideas and I didn't want to look back and say that I didn't go for it. This was something I really felt like, it was weighing on my heart that I needed to do. And regardless of how it turned out, I felt that that's the biggest thing. I didn't want to regret not doing it at all. So I felt it was better to just jump in. But I wanted to share that because I think that's important for people to hear.
Yeah, and it's a great interjection. So I'm glad you mentioned it. I want to get to this next question. Just thought about, here you are. You're starting a podcast. You're growing a podcast. If you could go pour back into that person or a listener who heard you say, you kind of wish you had a more structured plan, even though it worked out, you would have liked to have outlined your goals a little bit better. What could you say to somebody who's about to start a podcast now or is just starting with regard to those systems, the plan that they should have, the goals that they should have, how much they should outline it? What's kind of like a strategy to get to the place you would have liked to have been?
So I think, and I think this is what I ended up doing. So I think it's first and foremost, the most important is for people to figure, I know this sounds cliche, but it's really true, is to figure out their why. Why do they want to start a podcast? What is the reason for this? And what do they hope to get out of it? And I think that out of those two things, the why, and then what is it they'd like to receive from it, I think out of those two things, you'll start to get a sense of where priorities should lie, which is why for me, the conversations themselves is really where the focus ended up. I recognized that I was not super tech savvy. I knew very little about marketing a podcast, and I didn't know really much about monetization and those type of strategies when it comes to a podcast. So for me, it was about, I knew my why. It was a very personal thing for me. And for what was my priority, it was going to be about creating value in conversations. So yeah, I would say that those are the first two. And then from there, if they really write this out and figure out like what kinds of things they want to discuss and create some sort of focus around that, knowing that it might change, it might evolve, and that's okay. But to at least have, I believe in the power of writing it down. So I think that really is helpful and powerful for people.
So step one is to figure out the why behind it so that as you do the podcast, things can be in line with the main purpose.
Yeah.
So some of us, our main purpose is to leave a legacy. We don't care if anyone listens to it now, but maybe in 30 years, I want my kids or my friends or people to be able to get this. And somebody else's is, I want to have meaningful conversations that go somewhere. And that was your why. And so for you, it's very easy now for you to know that you're doing what you wanted to do and living in congruence with what you said you would do, because the main purpose was, I want to have meaningful conversations. I want to add value. I want to get value. I want to give value.
Yeah.
And someone else might have a why that says, I want to build my coaching business. Another person would say, I want to raise private equity for my business acquisitions or real estate acquisitions. And if we don't at least identify that ahead of time, we have a higher probability that we're going to actually not hit the mark.
Totally.
Love it. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Let me see. I've got a few things. I like one part that you mentioned earlier on. You said a reason why you're doing this is because of impact. Who do you want to impact?
So this is the $20 million question, right? Because I remember talking to somebody who has a podcast and he does podcast coaching, and there were a lot of people actually had the same reaction that he did, but it was like, well, who's your audience? And if you've looked at the topics I discussed, there's a range. There are things I'm really passionate about. And people joke with me all the time. They're like, so you talk about everything? I'm like, no, we really don't. There are a lot of things we don't discuss. Not that I'm not open to it, but it really is within the realm of those specific topics. But my two top were really the health fitness arena and the sociocultural political. And this person's response was, so your target audience is the politically minded fit person. And I was like, yeah, pretty much. And he was like, okay, that's interesting. And I was like, they exist. Well, there's a whole niche for that. But I really think that that's it. My target really is people who are looking to improve themselves. So people who believe in ownership, personal responsibility, and also are concerned with the zeitgeist. So the spirit of the times and what is happening in the world around them, and how can they take ownership of themselves in order to better prepare and improve, because I think that it all starts with the individual and that has a ripple effect. So I know that's not like a super concise, like specific answer. I don't limit like, oh, only these people should listen. It's not like that. But certainly people who are very opposed to my political views might not be thrilled with it. Although some of the more personal development and health fitness stuff are totally apolitical, and certainly my values, I think, always come across, but I think they're for anybody who shares a passion for that. But yeah, that's really the core of it. People who are looking to take ownership and improve their lives.
So what I'm hearing is that you do have a niche, but it's less of a niche of the topic exactly, and more of a niche of like the person who is aware of their physical fitness, their personal growth, and what's going on in the world. And that's kind of your avatar. The person that you're trying to focus on is somebody who's like you, that wants to continue to grow and learn and make the world a better place. I love that. I'm going to do this since it's time to wrap up the conversation. If you're listening, I want you to go ahead and scroll down, because in our show notes is Courtenay Turner's bio, as well as you'll find her links to her websites and to her podcast itself. So if you want to easily just go and check out her podcast, that link is in the show notes right now. Just scroll down. Courtenay, thank you for sharing your journey, your insights, and the value that you have through your experience. I grew from it, and I think our listener did as well. So appreciate your time. I'm going to let you go. So that's it. I'm out.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye for now. If you're glad that you checked out the podcast today, if you got some value out of this episode, some actionable takeaways, I invite you to do one of three things. A, you could do a written review on Apple. Let us know what you think. Just an honest written review. B, you could share the podcast with a friend of yours who needs it. Or C, at the very least, implement what you've learned to take your business and your podcast to the next level. And I'll see you on the next episode.